2 weeks ago, I was invited to a housewarming party by my college friend Emily. We'd been close during our undergraduate years, but life had taken us in different directions. She'd gotten married recently, and although I couldn't attend her wedding due to a family emergency, I was determined not to miss this gathering. Emily and her husband Ethan had just moved to Atlanta and wanted to celebrate their new home. I arrived late. It's a bad habit I'm trying to fix, but between finishing my shift at the gym and freshening up, I lost track of time. By the time I rang the doorbell, the party was in full swing. Ethan opened the door. I'd never met him before, but Emily had mentioned how kind and funny he was. He smiled warmly, and I immediately felt at ease. "Hi, Rachel. It's so nice to finally meet you," he said. He looked fit, though I could tell he'd put on a little weight since his wedding photos that Emily had shared. Not that it mattered. He seemed like the type of person whose energy would draw people in regardless. I greeted him, stepped inside, and was quickly swept into the vibrant atmosphere. The apartment was beautifully decorated, and Emily's touch was unmistakable. I joined her and the other guests, diving into the games, the drinks, and the laughter. Ethan was an attentive host, making sure everyone was comfortable, including me. During dinner, the conversation turned playful, as it often does after a few drinks. Someone teased Ethan about his weight, and Emily chimed in with a giggle. I could tell he felt self-conscious, though he tried to laugh it off. That's when I spoke up. "Come on, guys, give him a break," I said, smiling at Ethan. "If you want, I can help. I'm a personal trainer." The room erupted in cheers and playful jabs. "Ethan's got himself a trainer," someone shouted. Ethan's expression softened, though he still looked a bit embarrassed. "All right," he said with a sheepish grin. "You'll all see the results at the next party." The night carried on, but my mind lingered on Ethan. Not in the way you might think. I was genuinely intrigued. He seemed like someone who cared deeply about the people around him, and I admired that. Plus, I knew what it felt like to be called out in front of others, even if it was meant in good fun. The next morning, I got a text from Ethan. "Hey Rachel, thanks for the offer last night. I'm serious about it. Could we talk about a training plan?" I smiled at the message. Ethan seemed determined, and I admired that. I quickly replied, letting him know we could meet the next day to discuss his goals. When we met, Ethan opened up more than I expected. "It's not just about looking good," he explained. "Emily's always so full of energy, and I feel like I'm falling behind. I want to be healthier. For her, for myself." His honesty caught me off guard, but it also made me take him seriously as a client. We went over his schedule, dietary habits, and fitness history. I put together a plan that was challenging but realistic, something he could stick to without losing motivation. We agreed on 3 sessions a week. Early mornings, since he had a demanding job. The first few sessions were a mix of cardio and strength training. Ethan struggled, but didn't complain. Even when I could see he was exhausted. "Rachel," he panted one morning after a particularly tough set, "do you ever just not feel like doing this?" "All the time," I admitted. But I remind myself why I started. You have to focus on the end goal. He nodded, and I could see a flicker of determination in his eyes. Over the weeks, I noticed small changes in him. He pushed harder during workouts, his posture improved, and his confidence grew. Emily texted me one day saying, "Thank you for helping Ethan. He's been so much more positive lately." "I owe you." I laughed when I read the message. I didn't feel like I was doing anything extraordinary. Ethan was putting in the effort. One morning, after a session, we sat on a park bench to cool down. Ethan looked out at the sunrise and said, "You know, this has been more than just exercise for me. It's been therapeutic." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes people don't need advice, they just need someone to listen. As time went on, Ethan became more than just a client. He became a friend. We'd talk about everything. His job, his relationship with Emily, even his insecurities. I shared bits of my life too, though I tried to keep the focus on his progress. One evening, Emily invited me over for dinner. She and Ethan seemed happier than ever, and it felt good to know I'd played a small part in that. As we sat around the table, Ethan raised a toast. "To Rachel," he said, "for not just helping me get fit, but for reminding me what I'm capable of." I blushed, but it felt rewarding to see how much my work had impacted someone's life. After that dinner, things felt lighter between all of us. Emily and Ethan seemed more connected, and I could see the confidence radiating from Ethan. It wasn't just physical changes, though those were obvious now. His shoulders were broader, and he carried himself differently. But more than that, he seemed to have a sense of purpose. a spark I hadn't noticed before. One morning, after a particularly intense training session, Ethan lingered as I packed up my things. "Rachel," he said hesitantly, "I don't know if I've ever thanked you properly for this." "You don't need to," I replied. "You're the one doing all the work." "No, I mean it," he insisted, his tone serious. I don't think I realized how much I'd let myself go. Not just physically, but mentally. "You didn't just give me a fitness plan. You reminded me that I could be." His words stayed with me long after he left that day. It wasn't the first time a client had thanked me, but something about the way Ethan said it felt different. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's progress was undeniable. He had a routine now, a rhythm to his life that didn't exist before. Emily often sent me cheerful texts about how they'd started running together in the mornings or trying new healthy recipes. It was clear they were thriving, and I was happy for them. But somewhere along the way, I noticed a shift. Ethan started texting me more frequently, often about things unrelated to our sessions. A funny meme, a random thought, or just to ask how my day was going. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's normal for clients to feel a connection to their trainers. But as time went on, I couldn't ignore the growing undertone in his messages. One evening, he texted, "You're really easy to talk to, Rachel. Sometimes I feel like I can say things to you that I can't even tell Emily." I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. Ethan had always been open with me, but this felt different. I typed out a response and deleted it, unsure of what to say. The next morning during our session, Ethan seemed distracted. He wasn't his usual focused self, fumbling through exercises he'd mastered weeks ago. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." I didn't press him. Whatever it was, I figured he'd tell me when he was ready. Later that day, he texted again. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck between doing what's right and what you want?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew I needed to set boundaries, but part of me didn't want to. Ethan was my client, my friend, but nothing more. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The tension between Ethan and me became harder to ignore. It was like an invisible thread pulling us together, tightening with every interaction. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking. But the truth was, I felt it too. One evening, after a late training session, Ethan stayed behind. The gym was empty, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. "Rachel," he said, his voice low, "can we talk for a minute?" I nodded, trying to ignore the sudden flutter in my chest. "I don't know how to say this," he began, running a hand through his hair, "but I feel like I owe you more than I can ever repay. You've changed my life." I smiled, trying to keep things light. "That's what I'm here for, Ethan." "No, it's more than that," he insisted, stepping closer. "You didn't just help me physically. You made me believe in myself again. And I don't know how to deal with that." His words hung in the air between us. I felt my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to maintain my professionalism. But the way he was looking at me like I was the only person in the world made it impossible to think straight. "Ethan, you've done all the hard work," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I just gave you the tools." "That's not true," he said softly. "It's you, Rachel. You're the reason I've come this far." Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us. His hand brushed mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through me. I should have stepped back, said something to break the moment, but I didn't. Instead, I let him move closer until I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. His eyes searched mine, as if asking for permission. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Maybe not," he said, his voice barely audible, "but it feels like it is." I didn't know who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on mine. It was hesitant at first, like he was testing the waters, but it quickly deepened. I felt my defenses crumble, the lines I'd drawn for myself blurring into nothingness. When we finally pulled apart, reality came crashing down. "Ethan," I began, my voice shaky, "this can't happen. You're married." "I know," he said, his voice filled with regret. I couldn't stop myself." I stepped back, putting some distance between us. "You need to figure out what you want, Ethan. I can't be part of this." He nodded, his expression pained. "You're right. I'm sorry, Rachel. Don't," I interrupted. "Just go home to Emily. Work on your marriage. That's what you need to do." He left without another word, leaving me standing there, my emotions in turmoil. I knew I'd done the right thing by stopping it, but it didn't make it any easier. Ethan's apartment became my second home. At first, it was casual. Pizza nights, a bottle of wine, the sound of his favorite playlists filling the room. But slowly, there was an energy between us, something unsaid but unmistakable. One night, after we'd binged half a season of a TV show, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. Ethan shifted closer to me on the couch, his knee brushing mine. "You know," he started, his voice low, "it's nice having you around." I laughed softly, trying to lighten the moment. "Well, someone's gotta stop you from eating frozen dinners every night." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the air felt electric. "I mean it, Rachel. You make things better." My breath hitched, and I didn't pull away when his hand found mine. Instead, I let my fingers curl around his. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of something unfamiliar through me. "Ethan," I whispered, unsure of where this was headed. He leaned in slightly, his voice almost a murmur. "We're good together, aren't we?" Before I could overthink, he closed the distance between us. His lips were soft, tentative at first, as if waiting for me to respond, and I did. It wasn't hurried or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, a culmination of all the moments we'd shared. His hand cupped my cheek, thumb brushing my skin, and I found myself leaning into him, letting the world fall away. When we pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath mingling with mine. "This doesn't have to mean anything more than what we want it to," he said, his voice steady but gentle. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. "Just us? No expectations." From that night on, our connection deepened. There were no labels, no definitions, just two people finding solace in each other. Ethan had a way of making me feel seen, cherished, even in the simplest moments. We danced on the edge of friendship and something more, navigating a space that was uniquely ours. And while I knew the lines we were crossing, I couldn't bring myself to stop. In the weeks that followed, our dynamic shifted in ways I never expected. The playful banter between Ethan and me was still there, but now it was tinged with something deeper. There were stolen glances that lasted a second too long, touches that lingered, and nights where the silence spoke more than words ever could. One evening, I showed up at his apartment drenched from the rain, my shirt clinging to me and my hair plastered against my skin. "Rough day?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips as he handed me a towel. "You could say that," I replied, peeling off my jacket. "I think the universe has a personal vendetta against me." "Good thing I'm here to balance it out," he teased, his tone light. But when our eyes met, something shifted. His gaze flicked down, just for a moment, before meeting mine again. "Rachel?" he said softly, stepping closer. "Ethan." I started, unsure of what I wanted to say, but before I could think, he reached out, his fingers brushing my damp hair back. "You're soaked," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "And freezing." He grabbed one of his sweatshirts from the back of a chair and handed it to me. "Here, change into this." "Turn around," I said, half joking, but he didn't move. Instead, he just grinned. "We're friends, remember? No big deal." But the way his eyes lingered as I hesitated said otherwise. Finally, I gave in, slipping my wet shirt off and quickly pulling the sweatshirt over my head. The warmth of the fabric felt like a hug, and when I looked back at Ethan, his expression was unreadable. "You look better in that than I do," he said, breaking the tension. I laughed, but it was short-lived. His hand found mine, tugging me gently toward him. "Come here." Before I could overthink, he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was firm, grounding, like he was trying to tell me something without words. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the faint scent of cologne mixed with something uniquely him. When I finally pulled back, I didn't move far. Our faces were inches apart, and the charged silence between us made my heart race. "I don't know what we're doing," I admitted softly. "Neither do I," he replied, his breath brushing my skin. "But does it matter?" And then his lips were on mine again, but this time it wasn't tentative. It was passionate, urgent, as if he'd been holding back for too long. My hands found their way to his hair, pulling him closer as his arms wrapped around my waist. We stumbled backward, falling onto the couch in a tangle of limbs and laughter. His hands traced lazy patterns on my back, sending shivers down my spine. "Are we crossing a line?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Maybe," he said, his lips trailing down my jaw. "But maybe it's a line worth crossing." Ethan's words hung in the air, charged with possibility. I didn't respond right away, letting the weight of his touch and the intensity of his gaze answer for me. His hands slid down my arms, fingers brushing against my waist as he pulled me closer. "You're overthinking," he murmured against my neck, his voice low and teasing. "Maybe," I whispered, tilting my head slightly to meet his eyes, "but you make it hard not to." His lips curled into that infuriatingly confident smirk I had grown so used to, but this time it felt different, more intimate. His hand moved to cup the side of my face, his thumb brushing along my cheekbone. "Rachel," he said, my name sounding softer than ever before. "You can stop running from this. From me." Before I could answer, his lips met mine again, softer this time but no less consuming. The world outside, the rain, the deadlines, the noise, all of it faded into the background. I let myself get lost in him, in the way his hands explored my back, his fingertips leaving trails of warmth that lingered long after they moved. I felt his breath hitch as I traced the line of his jaw with my lips, his skin warm beneath my touch. "Friends with benefits?" I teased, my voice breathless but amused. "Is that what we're calling it now?" He shot back, a low chuckle vibrating against my skin. "You tell me." His answer wasn't in words but in action. His hands moved with purpose now, finding every inch of skin that had longed for his touch. It wasn't rushed, it was deliberate, almost reverent, as if he was memorizing every detail. "You drive me crazy, Rachel," he admitted between kisses, his voice rough with emotion. "Good," I replied, my own smirk forming as I leaned back slightly to look at him. "You deserve it." The tension between us had been simmering for weeks, and now it felt like the inevitable had finally arrived. Ethan's hands slid beneath the fabric of my shirt, his touch igniting sparks that coursed through my skin. His fingers moved slowly, as if savoring every inch, leaving me breathless and craving more. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice low and rough, sending shivers down my spine. I didn't have time to respond before his lips captured mine again, this time hungrier, more demanding. His body pressed against mine, the warmth of him grounding me even as my head spun. I let my hands wander too, tracing the strong lines of his shoulders and the curve of his back, pulling him closer as if proximity alone could sate the fire building between us. "Ethan," I breathed, barely able to get his name out between kisses. "Hmm?" he murmured, his lips grazing the sensitive skin along my jawline. I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned into him, letting my actions speak louder than words. My fingers tugged at the hem of his shirt, sliding it up and over his head. The way his muscles flexed under my touch made my pulse race, and I couldn't help but smile at the way his breath caught when my hands explored further. "Your turn," he teased, his hands toying with the edge of my shirt. I nodded, lifting my arms as he pulled it off, his eyes lingering as if he were committing every detail to memory. The intensity of his gaze made my cheeks flush, but the heat between us left no room for hesitation. "You're stunning," he said, his voice almost reverent. I pulled him back to me, my lips finding his again. His hands roamed my body, each touch sending waves of heat through me. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, every kiss and caress building the tension until it felt like we'd both combust. "Friends with benefits, huh?" I teased, my voice a little breathless. He smirked, his hands finding the curve of my waist as he pulled me impossibly closer. "I think we're redefining that." Ethan's smirk deepened, and he leaned in close, his breath warm against my neck. His lips brushed my skin, moving with deliberate slowness. I could feel my pulse quicken under his touch, the rhythm of it matching the way his hands slid along my back, drawing me nearer. "You okay?" he murmured, his voice low and intimate, a thread of genuine care woven through the heat of the moment. I nodded, my fingers tangling in his hair as I whispered, "Yeah?" His hands were everywhere at once, strong yet gentle, exploring me with an intensity that made me forget everything else. The couch beneath us seemed like the only solid thing in a world that was spinning, and even that felt unsteady as we shifted closer. Ethan's lips found mine again, this time softer, more exploratory. It was as if he were savoring the moment, the way our bodies fit together, the way our breaths intermingled. My hands trailed down his chest, feeling the strength of him, the steady beat of his heart beneath my touch. "You're incredible, Rachel," he said between kisses, his voice raw with sincerity. I couldn't help but smile against his lips, the words melting some of the tension I hadn't realized I was holding. He had this way of making me feel seen, not just in moments like this, but always. We moved together, the heat between us building with every touch, every kiss. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was deliberate, a slow burn that left me breathless. Ethan's hands traced patterns on my skin, his lips never straying far from mine. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could put into words. And yet, in the quiet moments when his lips hovered just above mine, when his hand cradled my face as if I were something precious, I felt it. "This is dangerous," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of nerves and desire. Ethan smiled, his forehead resting against mine. "Maybe. But it feels right." His lips captured mine again, and in that moment I stopped overthinking. I let myself be present with him, caught up in the way he made me feel alive, desired, and more connected than I had been in a long time. Ethan's hand slid beneath my shirt, his touch warm and confident, sending a shiver through me. His fingers traced the curve of my waist, his thumbs brushing against bare skin. It was both tender and electrifying, a slow exploration that made it impossible to think of anything but him. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his lips brushing against my jaw as he spoke. I tilted my head back, allowing him access, my heart pounding in my chest as his lips moved down to the hollow of my throat. Each kiss felt deliberate, like he was committing the feel of me to memory. My hands wandered over his shoulders, down his arms, savoring the strength in them, the way he held me as if I were something he couldn't bear to let go of. "Ethan," I breathed, my voice barely more than a whisper. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, his gaze heavy with something I couldn't quite define. Lust, yes, but also something softer, something that made my chest ache. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said, his voice low and steady. I shook my head, my fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt. "I don't want you to stop." His lips found mine again, hungrier this time, and I melted into him, my body responding to his as if we'd done this 100 times before. He pulled me onto his lap, his hands firm on my hips as he guided me closer. The world outside the room ceased to exist. It was just us, his breath on my skin, the heat radiating between us, the sound of my name on his lips as he whispered it against my collarbone. As his hands roamed, I felt a mix of exhilaration and vulnerability, like I was stepping into uncharted territory. But there was no fear, no hesitation. With Ethan, it felt safe to let go, to give in to the pull between us. We didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't awkward, it was charged, filled with the unspoken understanding of what we were doing and what it meant. His touch was deliberate, his kisses lingering, as if he wanted to savor every moment. Time blurred as we moved together, our breathing heavy and in sync. It was intimate in a way I hadn't expected, not just physically, but emotionally. Ethan wasn't just touching me, he was seeing me, knowing me, in a way that made my chest tighten. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and tangled together on the couch, he cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over my cheeks. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. "More than okay." His grin was lazy and satisfied, and he leaned in to press a soft kiss to my forehead. "Good." We stayed like that for a while, his arms around me, my head resting on his shoulder, the weight of the moment settling over us. It was new and unfamiliar, but it felt good, dangerously good. And in that quiet, as his fingers traced lazy circles on my back, I realized that whatever this was between us, it was more than just physical. It was messy and complicated and utterly impossible to ignore. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of shared glances, stolen moments, and whispered secrets. Ethan and I fell into a rhythm that felt both thrilling and precarious. It wasn't love, not yet, but it wasn't just lust either. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a mutual understanding that what we shared was fleeting, something that could only exist in the bubble we'd created. But bubbles always burst. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan and I sat on the couch, the silence between us heavy. He ran his fingers through my hair absent-mindedly, his gaze distant. "What happens when the summer ends?" he asked, his voice breaking the quiet. I froze, the question hanging in the air like a storm cloud. We'd avoided talking about the future, preferring to live in the moment. but his words forced me to confront the reality we'd been ignoring. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sighed, his hand falling away from my hair. You'll go back to your world, and I'll go back to mine, and this? He gestured between us. This will just be a memory. I hated how final it sounded, how much it hurt, but I couldn't argue with him. He was right, we were two people from different paths, drawn together by chance, but destined to drift apart. Does it have to be like that? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He looked at me, his expression softening. Rachel, you know it does. We can't live in this bubble forever. I wanted to protest, to beg him to fight for us, but deep down, I knew he was right. What we had was beautiful because it was temporary. Trying to hold on to it would only ruin it. That night, as we lay tangled together in the dark, I memorized every detail. The way his arms felt around me, the sound of his breath, the warmth of his skin. I knew it would be the last time. The next morning, Ethan was gone before I woke up. He left a note on the kitchen counter. Rachel, thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be alive. I'll carry you with me always. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. There was no goodbye, no promise to keep in touch. Just a quiet acknowledgement that our time together had come to an end. I spent the rest of the summer trying to fill the void he left behind, but nothing quite fit. Ethan had been a force in my life, brief but transformative, and his absence was a constant reminder of what we'd shared. When I finally left the beach house and returned to my life in the city, I carried the memory of him with me. It wasn't a painful ache anymore, but a bittersweet reminder that some connections are meant to be fleeting. Ethan taught me that love doesn't always come with a neat ending or a happily ever after. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and impossible to hold on to. But that doesn't make it any less real. And as I stepped back into my world, I realized that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the experience with me, allowing it to shape me, and moving forward with the knowledge that some people, no matter how briefly they touch our lives, leave a mark that never fades.